everyone. I hope you are having a good week this week. Before viewing this video, you want to make sure you've looked at the assignment sheet for paper 2. And also as a reminder, your revision for paper 1 is due this week. But for today, for this lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the first part of writing paper 2. And we're going to talk about things like media literacy. What is it? What do we mean by identity? And how they work together with critical media analysis. So let's start with media literacy. The Aspen Institute in 1992 came up with this definition: the ability to analyze, access, evaluate, and create media in a variety of forms. In other words, how to look at the media we're taking in and how to interpret its meaning, things like that. This came out of a growing awareness in 1992 of how much time people were spending with media, and it's only grown since then. So the average teenager in the United States engages about 5 hours of direct instructional time in regular high school. For anyone who's homeschooled, it may be different. For those of us who are out of high school, but then it could also talk about your direct instruction in college classes, that time changes a bit. But it adds up to a total of about 180 days per year of direct instruction. In contrast, teenagers in the United States engage about 9 hours of media use on an average day, 7 days a week, almost every day per year. This is not counting media multitasking. In other words, those of us who are like, we're watching TV and then we're scrolling on social media, or we're playing a game and watching a movie, those kinds of things. That number jumps to about 11 hours of total media exposure for the average teenager every single day of the year. This can change based on how much media is being used in school. How much media are we using on a day that we're not in class? Things like that. There are also things like economic access, things like that can also make a difference. But since but in other words, media is it plays such a central role in our lives. Media literacy education starts from a movement of educators, students, authors, media producers, and many others that says that we need to look at all examples of media, films, television shows, newspaper articles, websites, blogs, online news, songs, music videos, social media, and so on. And to get an idea of what's going on around there. So when analyzing any form or any type of media, including whatever type of media you select for your assignment for paper 2, there are 5 key questions you're going to ask. Who created the message? Is the writer the main actor? Is there a writer's room behind a television episode? Is there a company that's paying them to put this out? Anything like that. What creative techniques are used to catch my attention? Colors, sounds, visual effects, changes in vocal modulation. All of those things can be used to grab someone's attention, a viewer's attention, and keep it there. How might different people understand the message behind this media differently? Take into consideration different life experiences, things like that. What lifestyles, values, and points of view are represented in or omitted from this message? Are there multiple people talking to have a disagreement to show different sides of something? Or is it just one main character saying everything and it's their voice, their opinion, and so on? If it's a songwriter, are they just talking about their experiences, or are they talking about other people's experiences? And why was this message sent? In other words, what do they think, the creators behind this piece of media, what do they think the audience can get out of it? What's the point? And that's something that we'll also be talking about in another lesson later today. when we look at, or later this week, when you look at the rhetorical situation, that why it's sent is a big part of it. There are 5 core concepts when it comes to, comes from the Center for Media Literacy, gives us 5 core concepts that emerge from media literacy education. People who are media literate should be able to recognize that all media messages are constructed. In other words, someone is creating or constructing this piece of media, whether it's an intentional message or an unintentional message, that's different. But it's someone created it, someone constructed it. Maybe it's, again, a screenwriter, maybe it's a writer's room, maybe it's a company, whatever, but someone created the message and they have reasons for doing so. The second, media messages are constructed using creative language with their own role. In other words, there are expectations, there are genre conventions. If it's a YouTube video, there's an expectation that it'll be around a certain time, that it'll have certain type of visual aids. If it is a music video, there are conventions that follow depending on the genre of music. How fast or how slow are the lyrics? Things like that. What is the beat? What kind of instruments are played? All of those things. Again, different people experience the same media message differently because there is an understanding that there's a certain audience that has an awareness of the message that's being put out. And if you're not that target audience, you may not fully understand some of the media messages that are being used. Thinking back, if you watched the halftime show from the Super Bowl, there are a lot of visual elements at play that someone who is maybe not familiar with Kendrick Lamar's music may not have quite understood what he was going for. So sometimes people will not get the same message. Media has embedded points of view and values. In other words, the media represents different walks of life, different opinions, things like that. And most messages in the media, they have to take into consideration, are viewers going to watch this? Is this going to make money? Is this going to sell? Is this going to find its audience? So there has to be an understanding with that regardless of the message they're putting out, there has to be someone willing to receive it. With critical media analysis, it takes that idea and then focuses in on identity. In other words, how do you define yourself? What do you find most important about who you are? Does one part of you stand out or not? Do you change identities based on surroundings? Think back to when we talked about persona for paper 1. This connects to that idea. We have to think about our identities in singular terms often when it comes to things like race, gender, things like that, sexuality, all of those things. But also take into consideration that a lot of times our identities exist in a broader social and historical context and in relationship to others. So some things to keep around. Some things to keep in mind. Identity is socially and historically constructed. We figure out who we are based on those we spend time with. As we grow up, we first start out with this idea of who we are and who others are based on their interactions with the people around us, families, other grown-ups we spend time with, our peers, organizations we're part of, institutions like school, social groups, and the media we watch. Certain aspects of our identity, gender, social class, age, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, religion, age, disability, and others play significant roles in determining how we understand and experience the world, as well as understanding who has power, what opportunities we have, and what challenges we face. The media uses representations, images, words, characters, personalities like news hosts or social media icons, to convey specific ideas and values related to culture and identity in society. So when we're thinking about who we are, we may focus on cultural markers like clothing, makeup, fashion, body body acceptance, body art like tattoos and piercings, ways we express ourselves, biological and physiological markers like skin color, ethnicity, and things like that, as well as those other aspects we talked about. However, it's important to understand identities are also come from shared ideas, ideologies, biases, and ways of seeing the world around us. Our biological attributes, in other words, they're only part of who we are. As far as where they come from, often we've learned and internalized values over the courses of our lives from family, peers, other caregivers, role models, school organization, government, etc., and the media. Da, da, da. The media can both be a source of change and perpetuation of ideologies and norms. In other words, the media is using the representations that we talked about, and they can either be groundbreaking in time in terms of making things, deciding what's socially acceptable, what's not socially acceptable, what types of people are represented, things like that. And it can change over time. In Shakespeare's time, for example, it was illegal for anybody who was not male to act. So even female roles were played by male actors. So there's type of representation. Um, Representations are not neutral or objective, even if we think they are. They are constructed and they play an important role in imparting ideology. Um, we can ask ourselves whether the media produces ideologies or just reflects them, but there's no way to really tell. Sometimes it's intentional. First Captain America comic, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, when we talk about um, the rhetorical context or rhetorical situation, that has a very intentional message. Sometimes it's a matter of the right place, right time. Ted Lasso came out, 2020, wasn't expected to be very popular or anything, but because it came out during a time period when people were dealing with quarantine, things like that, the message that it had of positivity and hope was one that people needed. If you think about what goes on behind a scene in any sort of fictional media, just for example, screenwriters, directors, casting agents, set and costume designers all make choices. Someone has to write the script, someone else will edit the script and review it. A director will decide what lines and scenes to keep in from the script, which ones to take out. A casting agent decides who plays this role. Hair and makeup people decide what the characters actually look like. Someone will decide how they speak, how they interact, how they move, all of these things. There are deliberate storytelling choices and frames for any type of news, whether that's also news and nonfiction or reality programming, advertising. So it's important to consider whether or not a character's values or representations are complex or seem more like caricatures and stereotypes. Should we accept them at face value? Probably not. We should question them and see how they're being done. So, some questions to ask yourself when analyzing the type of media you choose to use for this paper. Is a group or issue accurately portrayed? Does it seem accurate? Does it rely on stereotypes? Does the group like how it's portrayed? What is the response to this? Is the portrayal or representation positive, negative, or both? Some have really great representation, some have negative representation, sometimes there's a combination. And what does that mean? Sometimes a negative representation is used to draw attention to an issue. So sometimes it can be effective, but sometimes it can just be offensive. Are different perspectives presented, or is it all one-sided? Is the perspective created by someone with the identity being portrayed? This is a really important one. Thinking back to, I used to watch Glee a long time ago when it first came out. And the first couple seasons seemed to be really good. There was a very diverse writer's room, and the people that were writing these characters were part of the communities that they were portraying. Later on, as the show went on, the writer's room grew smaller. The showrunner wanted more control, and wanted to have certain representations of certain characters, different races, different life experiences, like eating disorders, things like that, gender, sexuality, all of these things, disability. But they were being written by someone who didn't have experience with those identities and didn't seem to want to do the necessary research to doing so. So the characters wound up being very one dimensional stereotypes, and it wound up being pretty offensive unintentionally. So that's something to keep in mind too. Who's creating these messages? And what are the outcomes for how this is portrayed? If someone's only exposure to a certain community is through stereotypical media, how is that community going to be viewed? In other words, what kind of outcomes can happen from this? So that's all we'll cover in lesson one. And for this, in the first lesson for this week, you'll be looking at the rhetorical situation next. And as always, if you have any questions, please let me know.